The first time I met Srila Prabhupada was in Calcutta, November 1971. I was a Peace Corps volunteer then, not too far from Calcutta, and I used to go into Calcutta for milkshakes. And I was there, and I saw a big poster, Hare Krishna Festival. Well, I was very interested in the Hare Krishna movement. I was curious if it was bona fide or not, because I'd been attracted to the mantra in the West. So I immediately took a trolley to the festival. And at the festival there was, I believe it was Giriraj, Brahmachari then, speaking. Prabhupada was sitting there on the pandal. And it was an audience of all Bengali men. It was a fancy part of Calcutta. They were all in suits and ties, and the devotees were all in dhotis. And then the speaker was saying, "You have given up. You are chasing after the garbage we have given up." Finally, after having lived in India for 6 months, somebody said something that made sense. And I was intrigued. He says, you are chasing after the garbage we have given up. So then I went to the temple afterwards I found out where the temple was and went over there, and there was Prabhupada. And they said, "Would you like to come in and meet Prabhupada?" So I said, "Why, sure." So I walked in, offered a little respect, and so Prabhupada, there was same Calcutta temple, nothing's changed. And so the room was just a room full of mattresses with sheets, and Prabhupada was sitting behind a low table, and there was a few devotees in the room. And when I walked in, some devotees were arguing in the back of the room. I was thinking, this is a pure devotee, and they're arguing? They can just ask him. Because I had understood little about what some of the philosophy was. Of course, I understood later those devotees, at least one of them had shortly thereafter blooped, so wasn't one who was accepting authority. Anyway, I was wondering what was going on. Then Prabhupada said, "So you have a question?" And I said, "Yes. You are pushing this Hindu view, but why not Buddhism?" Kind of a stupid question. So then Prabhupada gave what I think was a very typical response for Prabhupada. "So what does the Buddha say?" Heck, if I knew what the Buddha said. So I went back to my Oriental Philosophy 1 course and said, well, eightfold noble and fourfold path and this and that. And then I turned to Prabhupada and said, well, actually, I don't know what the Buddha said. So he said, well, why are you advocating that path? Or why are you want to know the Buddhist path if you don't even know what the path is? Why are you asking me that question? So at that point, I became a little humbler and just sat and listened. When I first met Prabhupada in November 71, right after that I became vegetarian, but I still ate eggs. So when I saw Prabhupada, I said to him very proudly, "Oh, I'm vegetarian now, after I met you." And he said, so are the pigeons and the monkeys, who are big rascals. So I became very humble at that moment. Another time, Prabhupada was coming down the steps of Henry Street Temple. And Henry Street was a very narrow street, and my car was surrounded by devotees. And I was sitting in the driver's seat. And I was thinking, well, I better offer obeisances to Prabhupada, because at one time I didn't and I got in trouble. I'll tell that story in a moment. So I was thinking, well, I better offer obeisances to Prabhupada, but how can I do it? I can't open the door. There's not enough room. What am I going to do? And I'm just debating mentally on this, and Prabhupada's getting closer to the car. I said, well, I'll offer on the seat. Then somebody's opening the door. Well, I'll offer it, and I started crunching behind the steering wheel, trying to offer obeisances. And Prabhupada gets in the car, looks at me, pats me on the head, and goes, "That's okay." Then another time, I was in New York, in the hallway between Henry Street, between Prabhupada's quarters and the temple room. It's a very narrow hallway, and it was lined with devotees, and Prabhupada was walking. And I don't remember the year, but maybe it was 73. And I was embarrassed. I said, boy, people join, they're initiated in 6 months. I'm not even initiated yet. Though I think I was chanting 16 rounds in, but not even initiated yet. And I don't render any service. I was in graduate school. I was very, very embarrassed. I didn't want even Prabhupada to see me. So what I did is when the Prabhupada stepped out of his room, devotees offer obeisances, I hit the dirt immediately. And I said the prayers as slow as I could. So by the time I stood up, Prabhupada would have walked by. Usually devotees say the prayers real quick and stand up so they can see Prabhupada. But I said it real slow. But Prabhupada stopped in front of me. I didn't even know he saw me, and waited till I was done, and I was slow. And then I stood up, and there was Prabhupada right next to me. And he says, he said, "Nice to see you," and put his arm around me and gave me a hug. And I was amazed. After I met Prabhupada in Mayapur, then I saw him again in Calcutta a few weeks later. I had to go back to Bihar, and then I went back to Calcutta. And I saw Prabhupada and said, "Do you have any questions?" So I said, "Well, Prabhupada, devotees are telling me to offer my food to Krishna." Because everyone was preaching to me whenever I was with the devotees. I was the only Westerner there who wasn't a devotee. So boy, did I get preached to. So you must offer your food to Krishna. So I said to Prabhupada, "Well, I can't offer my food to Krishna because I don't know that Krishna's God." I think about it now, well, I don't think it's the most brilliant question, but anyway, I had said that to Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's response was, "Oh, that's okay, but then you thank God for the food." And I blurted out, "Oh, I should thank God silently." I don't know what made me say it. Super Soul kicked me and made me blurt it out. And then Prabhupada said, "No, you should out loud thank God for the food so you can explain to everyone what you're doing." So that tiny bit of faith I had that there's God and that we can at least thank God for the food, Prabhupada wanted me to use that tiny bit of realization I had to become a preacher and preach. And so I was amazed by how Prabhupada could deal practically with everything. When a Treya Rishi came in and Prabhupada was so sick, he used his sickness to convince a Treya Rishi that he's not, that the body and the soul are different. So Prabhupada was very practical and very compassionate. He knew just when I needed a little encouragement, a pat on the head, and just when I needed a chastisement, which may be just through a stare. So practical, compassionate, totally philosophical, and detached. He wanted us to be Krishna conscious, but for our benefit. And I always had the impression whoever Prabhupada was speaking to, he was speaking to them for their benefit, not his benefit. Because myself, I'm preaching, I might be thinking, how many points am I going to get? Am I going to do this? My benefit. When Prabhupada was speaking to you, you knew he was speaking to you for your benefit. And everyone in the room knew that. And then another time, Prabhupada, well, he'd call us in all the time after every scientific conference. Every day he'd call us in to get the results. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was, of course, his secretary then, and Sri Damodar Maharaj, and Madhava, and Jnana, and Siddhaputa, myself, we'd come in. And one time we came in and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, "So Prabhupada, your scientists are here." And Prabhupada couldn't see that well then. And he said, they're all in suits and ties, because even though the temple, the conference was in the Vrindavan temple, we wore suits and ties. And Prabhupada said, "So get them chairs." Either Sri Damodar Maharaj or Tamal Krishna said, "Oh, we're your disciples, we sit on the floor." And Prabhupada said, "No, they have to have chairs." But there weren't enough chairs. So I think 3 of us sat in one chair, and one of us sat down halfway pretending we were in a chair. Prabhupada couldn't see that well, but we couldn't sit on the floor, so we had to please Prabhupada. But he wanted his scientists, gentlemen, to be in chairs. Some of Prabhupada's godbrothers came to the pandal, and Prabhupada Siddhanivasa and stood up to receive them. Then he realized there weren't enough chairs for them, so he insisted they get chairs. Again, where do you get chairs in Mayapur? Somehow somebody found some chairs, but we had no center, and Prabhupada would not sit down till there was a chair for each of his godbrothers. He's very, very strict that way, of offering the proper etiquette at all the time. And that was Prabhupada's dealings when I was with him. I'd just sit and observe how, just offer the different etiquette to everybody. He knew exactly what to do, the right, perfect thing for everybody. One businessman came to see Prabhupada. He said, "Oh, I want to serve you, Swami. I want to dedicate my life to you. Everything is for you, Swami." So Prabhupada said, "Great, I'm going to Tokyo tomorrow. You come with me and join my preaching tour." "Oh, but I can't go." He knew just how to call bluffs and just how to engage people. Well, when I was in college, maybe 70, I studied Bhagavad Gita in an Oriental philosophy class. I was in engineering school. And there was only one verse in the entire Gita that stuck in my mind. It was, "Api said to Sudacharo," even if one commits abominable activities, one's devotee, they're to be considered saintly because they're rightly situated, to paraphrase a verse. So that verse struck in my mind. And the reason it struck in my mind, I don't really even know. It's not one of the more significant verses of the Gita, but somehow it seemed to me that, well, you're either a saint or a sinner. I was kind of a black and white type person then. I couldn't understand that verse. So then I asked my professor to explain it to me, gave me his I don't know answer, which is, well, it's intuitively obvious. That was his way of saying he didn't know. So I said, okay. Now, I never read Sanskrit in my life, never saw Sanskrit in my life, and a very, and I had read, that was Radha Krishna and Edgerton's Gita I had read just in English. So then when I met Prabhupada, I actually want to find this quote. So Prabhupada says that somehow or other, if someone prays to Krishna, you cannot say he's evil. Prabhupada and I are having discussion on a point that I had asked Prabhupada, if somebody lives an evil life but prays to become rich, he may still become rich? Prabhupada said, yes, praying to Krishna is not evil. Bob, oh yes, Srila Prabhupada, chuckling. Somehow or other, he prays to Krishna, you cannot say there's evil. Yes, I say. And Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Pi chet sudarcharo bhajate mam anya bhak. Have you read it? Yes, the Sanskrit I don't know, but the English I do. And that was the only verse in Bhagavad Gita that I knew in English, the whole Gita. And that was the very first verse Prabhupada quoted to me in Sanskrit, and then he asked me if I know what it means. And it didn't dawn on me till later that day that Prabhupada did a transcendental trick on me. Krishna did a transcendental trick. And Prabhupada actually knew that was the only verse I knew in Gita, and it's the first one he quoted to me. What actually convinced me of Prabhupada is whatever I asked, he could give a cogent, satisfying answer. There was never any doubt that Prabhupada understood the philosophy, and there was a question, there were some things that I couldn't understand yet. There's a process of understanding it. And Prabhupada never tried to force understanding down my throat, but he made it clear to me that there's a process. He said, you follow these boys and girls like they're doing for 6 months, then you'll understand also. And he made the point to me that there's a process of understanding. I just can't walk in off the street, you know, with no regulative principles and understand everything. So Prabhupada was very patient about that. And he was very confident that if you want to, it's your choice, you follow this process, you can also experience what they're experiencing and be happy. So then, the last time I saw Prabhupada, I was in New York. I'd just gotten about to get initiated, or got initiated, I don't remember, in '76 at Ratha Yatra. And Prabhupada wasn't feeling that well then, but he was in the temple room one morning, and he was giving out cookies. So I walked up to get cookies, and I said, wow, I can offer a base and get a cookie, and Prabhupada's going to be glad to see me. You know, actually rendering some service now, I'm getting initiated. I didn't understand that he's offering the service, the initiation. I thought I was rendering service. And so I walked up to Prabhupada thinking, oh, he's going to recognize me. Boy, all the devotees are here. He's going to recognize me. I walked up to get a cookie, and Prabhupada looked at me as if I was a blank, a totally transparent sheet of glass, and saw right through me as if I wasn't there. And only Prabhupada could have that look. And that humbled me, hopefully, for the rest of my life. Right before Prabhupada left, I went to India to give the conference to Rup Damodar Maharaj, Sudha Putta Prabhu, and others on the first international conference on life comes from life, and I was a geologist giving a paper on evolution. So I arrived with Atreya Rishi. We ended up on the same plane. And we went right to see Prabhupada, and we walked in Prabhupada's room, and Atreya was shocked, as I was, to see Prabhupada so thin. And Prabhupada could see. Prabhupada was so thin, just all bones, how shocked Atreya was. And he turns to Atreya. Atreya can give you more details. And he says, so I've been preaching to you that I'm not this body. Now you see my body is gone, I'm still here. Now do you understand I'm not this, you're not this body? And he used Atreya's shocked expression to emphasize the point, he's not this body. Okay. There was one question I asked Prabhupada that was at the time in the movement, the shot heard around the world, because Prabhupada hadn't expressed this thought before, and it really shook people up. And I asked Prabhupada at one point, he was discussing karma. So you suffer because you're karma. So I said to Prabhupada, I didn't want to challenge him at all. I remember thinking, well, I don't want to challenge him, but I have this question. So a way I put it, Prabhupada said, Prabhupada, I ask you this very humbly. Do you get sick? Thinking that if he got sick, it's from karma. And Prabhupada said, oh yes, I get sick. And I said, but you're a pure devotee, and pure devotees shouldn't have karma. You clap your hands, and from the deities, your karma is gone, and you're not accumulating more karma, so why is it you're getting sick? And Prabhupada then said, oh, I'm not a pure devotee. He spoke very humbly. But I think he said, like, Radharani is blessing, something like that. I don't remember precisely. And then I pursued it a little further. Well, I said, well, why is it you suffer then? Is it the way Christ was suffering? Something like that. And Prabhupada said, the reason I suffer is because I've done one sinful thing. I've taken too many disciples. And when you take too many disciples, then you must suffer the sins of your disciples. The spiritual master suffers. And that was a very, very heavy thing, Prabhupada said. And even though I wasn't in the society, I understood that was very heavy at that time. And the devotees there, they were awestruck. They were just walking to walls thinking that my sins are affecting Prabhupada. Because everyone had total affection for Prabhupada and that my sins would affect it. So Prabhupada made that statement. And he said that my sinful activity is taking too many disciples, but for preaching purposes, I'm willing to take that suffering. Just for the sake of preaching, I'll take too many disciples. Karuna Prachu